The story is based on an account of German tactical small unit combat in the approaches to Leningrad at the end of August of 1941, as recalled by the German soldiers after the war from personal experience and originally published in the American Army pamphlet number 20-269 in January of 1953. By the end of August of 1941, the German Army Group North had beaten several major Soviet counterattacks and was slowly encircling Leningrad. The Soviets put up a very strong resistance in the road from Kingisepp to Leningrad, so they could provide an open route for the retreating forces coming from the Battle of Luga. The Soviet Central Command had a weak control on the situation, but some individual units fought fiercely and many times to the death in the defense of the approaches to Leningrad. As a note to the date of this tale, the original account says it was on the 28th and 29th of August, but I have checked the original German and Soviet maps and battle reports, and the chronology is totally wrong. It actually happened between the 16th and the 22nd of August, a week before, so I have changed the dates accordingly. The 16th of August, the German 8th Panzer Division was ordered to advance and conquer the road to Leningrad, all the way to a point south of Gatchina. It was an important road and rail junction and a key to encircle Leningrad from the south. After securing that area, the 8th Panzer Division would be in an excellent position to attack the retreating Soviet forces that retreated north from Luga. In the meantime, other German forces would advance to secure Gatchina itself and other areas further north on the road to Leningrad. The terrain was swampy forest land, with minor ridges and small hills that provided strategic locations that allowed for good observation points. It was summertime, so the roads were open to vehicles and infantry could traverse the countryside with relative ease. It is important to note that in those latitudes, the sun rose at 0300 hours in August, so there was sunlight for most of the day. And this is the point where our tale starts. The 8th Panzer Division moved out of its jump-off point after sunrise the 16th of August at 0400 hours and quickly captured the small town of Kurowiczi and its train station. Soviet resistance was weak, and it was easily brushed aside by the advancing panzers and their motorized infantry. The next objective was Volsova, about 25 kilometers or roughly 15 miles away to the east from Kurowiczi. The German forces had a vanguard, small reconnaissance force with a liaison officer and messengers on motorcycles that kept them informed on the ground and on the enemy forces ahead. The main German force arrived in Volsova at 12:30 hours, with its advanced reconnaissance force 7 kilometers or 4.5 miles ahead in the village of Kikerina. A German supply column truck on its way to resupply the vanguard German force was ambushed 2.5 kilometers or 1.5 miles east of Volsova. The rest of the trucks ran back to Volsova to report and to seek help. Lieutenant Schneider was the commander of Company C in the Panzer column at this juncture. He assessed the situation and sent the 1st and 2nd Panzer platoons to Laganova, just northeast of Volsova, along with the Nebelwerfer rocket launchers towed by half-tracks. Just below them, to the south, the 5th Platoon Combat Engineers occupied the outskirts of Volsova to the northeast. There was a ridge and a forest just east of the town. Schneider drove up the small ridge and saw about 300 Soviet riflemen coming out of the woods very close to the highway, making their way to the ridge between the forest and Volsova. On the southwest of the forest, the Soviets had a machine gun and an anti-tank gun covering the road. Schneider thought they were probably the same forces that had ambushed the German supply trucks just some minutes ago, since there were 2 German trucks burning in a ditch next to the road. It seemed that the Soviets were trying to cut off the German vanguard by recapturing the town of Volsova. Schneider decided to eliminate the Soviet threat and got permission to do so from his commanding officer at 13:05 hours, just over half an hour after capturing Volsova. His plan was the following. Company C's objective was to neutralize the Soviet attack and to prevent any further Soviet attempts to retake Volsova or cut the road. After the naval welfare rocket launchers had fired their first salvo, the 1st Panzer platoon would set up a smoke screen and advance to the forest from their actual location on the road from Laganova to Kurowiczi. The 2nd Panzer platoon, located just south of the 1st platoon, would advance parallel to them at the same time to the objective just south and parallel to the 1st Panzer platoon's objective at the edge of the forest. The 4th platoon would first fire the rockets and then follow the 2nd tank platoon to help them eliminate any Soviet forces between the ridge and the edge of the forest. Schneider joined the 4th platoon, keeping the 1st squad of the 4th platoon as a reserve. And finally, the 5th platoon would advance on foot alongside the main road and would protect the southern flank, clearing of enemies the southwest edge of the forest. Half an hour later, as the Germans were occupying their attack positions, Schneider spotted the Soviets advancing, with their scouts some 20 meters ahead of the riflemen. The Soviets were pulling an anti-tank gun to the ridge west of the forest. There was also a second wave emerging from the forest and advancing in the same direction. A few minutes later, the second wave felt the whole rocket salvo force from the naval welfare launches. Just as Schneider planned, the smokescreen hid the advance of the panzers to the north. But the Soviet troops on top of the ridge saw them and opened fire. The German panzers fired back and the firefight intensified. As the smoke cleared, Schneider could see his tanks had captured the top of the ridge and were annihilating the Soviet infantry with their machine guns. The Soviet anti-tank gun never made it to the top of the hill, as it was abandoned by its crew in the middle of the field, so the Soviets had no weapons to fight back against the panzers. The Soviet second wave was badly hurt by the German rocket fire and the survivors fled back to the forest. All remaining Soviet soldiers on the field were taken prisoner by the German infantry of the 5th platoon. 25 minutes after combat began, at 1400 hours, the 1st Panzer platoon came under heavy weapons fire. This was followed by a Soviet infantry attack. Schneider immediately sent his reserve, plus 1 Panzer from headquarters and supporting rocket fire. 20 minutes later, at 1420 hours, the Soviet attack was repulsed and the road had been secured in less than 2 hours. There were no further Soviet attacks from the forest, due to the high number of casualties produced by the German counterattack. So, the 8th Panzer Division proceeded east towards its objective, just south of Gatchina, without encountering any serious Soviet resistance. Schneider's forward column had advanced an astonishing 32 to 40 kilometers, or roughly 20 to 25 miles, to reach the village of Sivoritsi, 16 kilometers or 10 miles south of Gatchina, and in the rear of the retreating Soviet forces that moved north to Leningrad from Luga. The German plan at this moment called for 2 different movements. The first to the south towards Luga, and the second southeast to the suburb of Starosibirskaya. In this way, they would cut off the retreating Soviet forces who were preventing further German advances from Luga. Schneider was ordered to move through Koblino and occupy Kurowiczi. This was an important junction used by the Soviets to reinforce their troops in Starosibirskaya and also to withdraw to Viritsa or retreat from the area. Capturing this village would almost trap the Soviet forces to the south. Schneider and his forces reached Kurowiczi at 21:45 hours. 10 Soviet trucks loaded with riflemen were moving northeast towards Viritsa. Schneider's panzers opened fire, but 3 trucks escaped, 1 to the northeast to Viritsa and 2 to the southwest to Starosibirskaya. The remaining trucks were destroyed as the Soviet soldiers escaped into the night. After the swift capture of Kurowiczi, Schneider set up the defense. The southern road to Starosibirskaya was mined, and the approaches were defended by the 1st Panzer Platoon and 1 squad from the 5th Panzer Engineers Platoon. The road to Viritsa to the northeast and the eastern side of the village were guarded by the 2nd Panzer Platoon. The remaining forces of the 5th Platoon went to the northeast of the village and set up an outpost at the edge of the forest. Schneider's remaining force went to the other side in the northwest and constituted the reserve to be deployed when needed. All non-combat and service vehicles and forces stayed behind in the village of Kobrina. 2 hours and a half after the Germans entered Kurowiczi, they heard tracked vehicle noises to the east, but nothing really happened. At 0100 hours, a Soviet truck hit a mine. 2 soldiers were killed and a Soviet officer was captured. The others escaped. 0230 hours, the 2nd platoon reported tracked vehicle noises very close around them, but nothing else happened until at 0400 hours, the 2nd platoon leader was shot. Half an hour later, Soviet trucks approached from the southeast and were immobilized by the German mines. The Germans wasted no time and opened fire with their machine guns at point-blank range. The Soviet soldiers still inside of the trucks jumped and looked for cover in the forest. At the same time, the eastern part of Kurowiczi was under attack. Schneider feared that some Soviet troops during the chaos would have infiltrated the defense positions and ordered the 5th platoon to come the village from the north. At 0510 hours, the 5th platoon, supported by 2 Panzers, combed the village, advancing through the main street and searching the houses. And indeed, Schneider was right, as house-to-house fighting noise was immediately heard. The Soviets welcomed the 5th platoon with sniper fire and hand grenades. The German engineers used grenades, explosive charges, machine guns and tanks, clearing one house after the other in a savage fight for the village. The Soviet soldiers used every single trick to gain the advantage and fought many times to the death. They hid in haystacks and opened fire at point-blank range. Sometimes they feigned to be dead and attacked when the German soldiers had just passed. At about 0540 hours, the eastern part of Kurowiczi had been cleared of Soviet soldiers. But in order to clear the western part, Schneider had to employ all of his reserves. It was an ugly affair, as every haystack or place where a Soviet soldier could hide was sprayed with bullets. Every soldier had to be either killed or taken prisoner, because otherwise he would hide and come back to shoot at the Germans from the back. The will to fight was so strong in this battle that the few Soviet soldiers that actually surrendered did so because they had no other choice or they were very badly hurt. After 20 more minutes of combat, Kurowiczi was again in German hands by 0600 hours. Nevertheless, the Soviets tried once more. At 0750 hours, they attacked from multiple directions as Soviet artillery fire rained on the village. In addition to attacks from the southwest and east, there was movement in the forest to the west. Also, a KV tank was firing into the village from a location to the southeast, beyond the German mines. Schneider decided to send the 5th platoon to confront the new menace from the west, and he ordered naval Werfer rocket launchers to prepare a rocket salvo to neutralize the KV tank. It was now 0815 hours, and the 5th platoon arrived at the new defensive positions only to find Soviet soldiers advancing directly towards them at a distance of roughly 1,000 meters or yards. At the same time, there was a large explosion to the southeast. The KV tank had hit a mine, but that did not stop it from firing into the village. The fighting was now at a crucial point, as more Soviet reinforcements arrived, and the Germans were slowly pushed inside the village. Schneider called for reinforcements, but got no response on the radio. Therefore, he ordered the naval Werfer rocket launchers to fire at the KV tank, and they scored a few hits, finally knocking out the heavy tank. With the fire from the KV neutralized, Schneider gathered a column of all available tanks and half-tracks and moved northwest along the road to Kobrina. After reaching a point about roughly 500 meters or yards, the column turned left and to the south, flanking the attacking Soviet force. His attack caught the Soviets by surprise, and many riflemen were overrun by the Panzers. This action defeated the Soviet attack from the west, as the surviving soldiers ran for cover or surrendered. It also had a domino effect, as the Soviet forces that attacked Kurowiczi from the southeast saw the German armored column approaching from the north, and this, along with the loss of the KV heavy tank, convinced them to retreat to the forest north of Starosibirskaya. By 0930 hours, the main force of the 8th Panzer Division finally entered Kurowiczi from the road to Kobrina, but the fighting had finished just 15 minutes before. It turns out that the 8th Panzer Division had to defend against the Soviet attack from Gatchina and could not arrive before, as it also had to detach part of its force in order to capture Gatchina. I find this story important for various reasons. First, the Soviets staged successful, if costly, delaying actions, even if they lost at the end. Since they had lost most of the available tanks, the Soviets now started to learn how to use them better. Second, the Germans at this point of the war continued to display an excellent level of professionalism, turning the tables on the fortunes of battle because of their experience. And third, their excellent use of combined arms. These actions still showed how a smaller force that made use of rockets, infantry, tanks, etc., along with their command and control principles on the battlefield, could dare to advance deep in the enemy's rear, capture and hold important objectives. Nevertheless, every delay in action by the Soviets, every knocked-out German panzer, every German casualty, slowed the German advance and gave one more day for Soviet reserves and for the winter to arrive. As in many more cases we will see in the future, it was exchanging blood for time. I hope you liked this episode. Please share, like and subscribe for the channel to grow. And if you did not like it, as always, thank you very much for watching this far.